The media, as Advani said, for the media under the emergency, Modi has tried to push it to its knees, tried to make it crawl. But even Modi doesn't have the strength to make the media lick. If the media is licking, it is by its own free choice because it thinks it is tasting honey, and all that it is tasting is not honey, but something very different, very stinky.
And today, senior journalist Dr. John Dayal is joining us, and we will be talking about the state of Indian media. And the occasion is the National Press Day, which was celebrated 2 days back on 16th of November. And using this occasion, we will be discussing what are the challenges before free press in democratic India. John Dayal, sir, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you indeed. Pleasure to be with you.
Sir, you have been in journalism for last 4 decades. You are a well-known writer. You are a member of civil society, human rights activist. When you look at Indian media, what is your reactions? Is it living up to expectation of people, or is it just expressing the wishes and interests of the ruling classes?
I have been a journalist for 52 years, slightly more than 5 decades. What have I seen in these 5 decades? The section of media which made money when I was a very, very young, raw journalist at the very bottom of journalism to now. The media that was making money then is the media that is making money now. The media which was trying to speak the truth then was not making money then. It is not making money now. The media speaking the truth to power was under tremendous pressure then. Some of them were jailed. The media speaking truth to power is under unimaginable stress, which even Indira Gandhi, in her worst mood, would not have dreamt to do. And now, people are being killed, raped, maimed, arrested without reason on the most flimsiest of allegations. People from the media who were arrested during the emergency were those people like me. I was not arrested, but today I'm in the media and also an activist. People who were arrested in 75 were people who were in the media, but were also activists in the Jayaprakash movement, or in other political movements. They were arrested. Ordinary people like me, all the reporters, sub-editors, very few, if any, were arrested across the country. If you were a member of the RSS, maybe you were arrested. But if you were just an ordinary, salaried journalist who were not elected, the editor, the proprietor, may be under stress. That is the qualitative difference in the 50 years of that passing. I must also tell you, when I became a journalist, the independence was only 20 years ago, 20 years in the past. People were recovering. Senior journalists were recovering from the British control of newspapers. There was no concept of investigative reporters. You were still accepting press notes from the government, but perhaps not selling your soul. It was only in the 70s that the so-called investigative reporting took place, and after that, whether it was the emergency, whether it was the massacre of the Sikhs, whether it was Mr. Modi's regime in Gujarat and the massacre of the Muslims, whether it was the Bhopal gas crisis, whether it was Harshad Mehta, whatever happened was an evolutionary process which was allowed to take place, by a group management which found some use in this freedom to its reporters. It was allowed to take place by a group of reporters who had honed their talents, who had learned, who don't wanted to just see the superficial aspect, wanted to go deep, and they were given the time and the resources to do so. Today, we are reduced to a media which is he said, she said, sound bites, no depth at all. And my last point before you ask any other question was, there was the jute press, as we used to call it, controlled by mill owners, whether they were jute owners or steel mills or Rohtas Nagar, all these people were media owners even then. But never was there a situation where one man, the richest man in the country, the biggest industrialist in the country, controlled from a third to, or you could say, of maybe more than a third of the Indian media, including a monopoly in the television sector, particularly in the language sector, also in the English sector. This had never happened. We also have a seamless connection between these groups of owners and the government, which uses income tax, CBI, enforcement directorate, all of which are now empowered. And their bosses have been given a carte blanche. The bosses have been assured a 5-year rule, if they so want, and therefore are even more servile in trying to control the media. This was not so even in the 18-20 months that Indira Gandhi was there in the emergency. This is a startling change in the environment. The poisoning of the ecosystem, the environmental cocoon or bubble, you can call it, in which the media needs to work. And this is a new threat which we need to learn how to face and continue to speak truth to power.
Sir, the new government which you are referring to, under which media is increasingly working under pressure, came to power in 2014. But you tell me honestly, when did journalists, civil society activists really challenge the issue of political economy of media before 2014? Some activists say that till 1980s, that was the questions in parliament. People used to ask questions about who owns newspaper. But after 1980, things stopped completely. Would you agree?
No, that is what I was trying to say. I focus in my earlier statement on the pressures on the media. I didn't speak at all on did the media live up to its duty? Did the media, given the situation then, did it do? I told you the media even then was largely controlled by, as I said, the jute press industry, whose economic interests were tied to liberalization, the license Raj. The license Raj was not licensing the common people. It was not licensing me and you. It was not licensing our civil liberties, our economic liberties. It was not licensing our opportunities. It was licensing industrialists, corporations, corporate sector, crony capitalism. They were not as vicious as they are now, because even there was still an element, and therefore you can say in the case of Indian Express, for instance, the owner was a member of a party. The owner was a rich man. The owner belonged to the same community as all owners do even today, which was a trading community from Rajasthan, which had all the capital, the working capital with it, which had its own, you can say, parallel system of loans, etc., and which therefore largely kept itself floating, irrespective of the political situation, irrespective of policies. It floated very well when Indira Gandhi was nationalizing the banks. It floated very well when Narasimha Rao and before him Rahul Gandhi came and liberalized the thing. Was the media doing its job? I recall in the 70s, even as I said about Express, maybe not Times of India, not Hindustan, but there was a coverage of, let us say, let's take the Bhopal gas crisis as a situation. The media followed it up. The media continued to explore and expose the linkages between Exide, between the ownership, Indian and American, and the terrible, terrible accident which killed so many and has maimed generations to come in the larger area of Bhopal and Madhya Pradesh. The media continued to follow up the plight of the people. The media continued to follow up the Supreme Court. It continued to name and shame judges who played politics, who, if they did not make money, at least they benefited and rose from the Supreme Court onto the World Court. So it followed it up, irrespective of the liberal regimes that had started coming up with the demise of Indira Gandhi and the rise of first Rajiv Gandhi and then P.V. Narasimha Rao. So I quite get what you're trying to say. The media has not been 100% pro-people and challenging the government. But Harshad Mehta was exposed. But even before Modi came to the center and Manmohan Singh was there, Manmohan Singh was largely supported by the media because media was of the same liberal economic entity which was benefiting from the liberalization. So I would say the vested interest of a large section of the media was the same as the vested interest of the government and the other capital holders of that period. But there was even then a section of the media. I'm not talking of just the left-leaning media, but some major groups which were challenging. Manmohan Singh was consistently challenged. Please understand, when the Supreme Court said, or was it today, when the Supreme Court said, we will reopen the case of the selling of Hindustan Zinc. And I suppose later they will also open up the selling of Centaur, which was the things started by the then Commerce Minister, who is no longer, who's very anti-Modi just now. But it was challenged, it was exposed. What has happened in 2014 is all the evil of liberalization. And let me tell you again, Mr. Modi and Mr. Ambani, and the Congress regimes, they have had a very symbiotic relationship. And many of the Congress ministers, including P. Chidambaram, including, you could say, the late President Pranab Mukherjee, they had a very symbiotic relationship. And if somebody were to do chapter and verse, a day-to-day nexus between what was decision-making in the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, the Ministry of Commerce, the licensing systems, and see how Mr. Ambani was, if not the major beneficiary, often enough the solitary beneficiary of the changes of policy. That continues to the day and has been expanded multifold. That was what I was going to say. And here, the media is controlled by the same man. Then the media was not controlled by the same man.
But sir, what has happened that all media houses which were, let's say, promoted by the previous government, suddenly they took U-turn and now they became bitter critique of the previous government?
That's what I was trying to say. Which media today is a bitter...
I can also refer to Hindustan Times Group, which is said to be very close to the Congress party. But you see its coverage, it's completely pro the government of the day, and it is very harsh and it is very critical of the previous government. Am I right, sir?
Gratitude is not a hallmark of the businessmen of India. They want relief and benefits every day. What is gone in the past, they will say, we have served you. What you gave us, we have given you service for that. Today, whoever has given us thing. I mean, you're very right in giving an example of the Hindustan Times. If you trace its growth from 47 till today, If you trace its growth in the Indira period, if you trace its growth in the post-Indira period, in the Atal Bihari Vajpayee period, it has always been a political wind direction finder. It has always done that. If you go through its editorials, if you come to Times of India, Mr. Girilal Jain, a progressive editor, in his last years was an absolute pro-Hindutva person, you could say. In a way, you could say that. Mr. Kuldeep Nair, I should not name him, towards the end of his life, he was quite open to receiving RSS chiefs and Amit Shahs of the world. So, largely, unless you're talking of the left media or what could be called the socialist media, the media owned by the corporate sector, India Today, it was started as an in-flight magazine for Air India during Mrs. Gandhi's emergency. When she returned to power, when she was not in power, it suddenly became an investigative magazine and was telling you about torture and terror. It played with Mrs. Gandhi all through her regime, turned anti-Gandhi. After that, it had its editors, some of the stalwarts of the right wing. You know that, we know that. The names are there in the public. Some of the major stalwarts, you could say. And today, the only TV station we have, NDTV, will it bear a close scrutiny today? Will its anchors, barring one or two, bear a close scrutiny today? Is it speaking for the people? When you say we are giving equal opportunity to every person, and you have one BJP spokesman, one pro-BJP spokesman, one possibly BJP government spokesman, the anchor himself speaks for the party, and you are one person representing CPI, CPM, left, liberal, whatever. What is it? By design, you know what you're doing. If you analyze each of the anchors of NDTV, I mean, the others that are gone case, I'm not talking of Republic or Times Now or Z or 18 or Aaj Tak, none of them. I'm just focusing on NDTV to tell you it cannot bear a microscopic look at its presentation of news and views if somebody were to honestly do it. I mean, that is the point. It just cannot. If you look at, let us say, a neutral person who's very pro-defense services, very pro-Indian Army, who travels and has been a passenger in fighter jets. What is his mindset? He's a militarist, you could call him that. He doesn't look at India-Pak, Indo-China relationships from the point of view or the spectacles of a scholar of strategic strategies and strategic affairs and foreign affairs. He looks at it as a patriotic journalist. A certain amount of I and we is an embeddedness that is in the nature of things. We are Indians. In any war, my children could be fighting. So being a pro-Indian journalist is not a crime. But when you look at everything as a warmonger, what do we say? So it's a very subtle thing. You know, journalism is not a black and white thing, although the print is black and white with a dash of color. But when you just start going into the nuances, when you, like an onion, start peeling off the layers that constitute journalism, you'll realize that the large chunk has always been, whether it was the British Raj, Nehru, Congress, Indira Gandhi, post-Indira Gandhi, Rajiv, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and today. A large chunk, 2/3 perhaps, 3/4 perhaps, has been a spokesperson of the regime, subserving the regime and benefiting from it. But in nicer climates, it has still allowed a certain amount of micro freedom to some journalists, to some editorial writers, to some cartoonists. That is what I was saying.
Sir, now BJP is much liked by mainstream media. So there could be two explanations to that, two possible explanations. One is that when LK Advani was the information and broadcasting minister after 1970s. I think people from Hindu right organizations, they started
77,
penetrating.
Janata Party rule.
Janata Party rule. The journalists having Hindu right leaning, they started penetrating into mainstream media, and slowly and gradually they become so powerful that now we could say that now the media is dominated by Hindu right. Another explanation is that it is the charisma of Modi ji, maybe his PR management skill. So what do you think? What are the most important factors, or both are contributing to the kind of support media is giving to Hindu Nationalist Party?
You look at it from the other point of view. This is not a sexual thing that you can say there is charisma and there's a natural attraction or whatever. It's a very deliberate, a very cold-blooded effort. In 1977, I'm an eyewitness to these transitions. Mr.
I want to interrupt you once again that when you read how the media has covered Prime Minister and the present Home Minister, like let's say in 10 years back, and now they are being represented as the hero, and at that time he was even called the what should I say, the man who is spreading hatred. So you could see also how his image has been remade. Yes.
No,
Sir, please
no. Before I come to Modi in particular, let me just take you back again. How does the media? You spoke of Lal Krishna Advani. When Janata Party came to power, the internal structure of the party was that the highest they could get was not the Ministry of Home Affairs, was not the Ministry of Finance, which they wanted. They could get Ministry for Information. And for the RSS, capturing the mind has always been a big thing. Mr. Advani handpicked. It is not journalists making inroads. It is Mr. Advani handpicking young journalists and planting them in every media organization at the very lowest rung, which is very easy. Which newspaper owner will refuse take this man as a reporter or as a sub-editor? In due course of time, by the time Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who was foreign minister then, was now prime minister, by the time he became prime minister, the same people were news editors and chiefs of bureaus and resident editors. You see how they grew. And now some of them are media owners. They own channels, they own websites, they own whole lots of the media industry. At least I can name you more than a dozen of them. So that was a very deliberate act, and it's a deliberate act. Now, even now I could still say, as a media man, giving them the benefit of the doubt, I can still say that they're not doing out of love for Modi. They're doing under fear. The capitalist community, whether it is in America or it is in India, in the US, suddenly they become nice when Congress or the president or the Supreme Court says, let us break up AT&T into 4. Let us look into, Facebook. Let us look into some pharmaceutical company. Let us look into some airline. Then suddenly they say, okay. They become for some time, very socialistic. The same thing is here. When Mr. Modi, if he were not using CBI, ED, and other income tax department, would find everybody from politicians to media to industrialists less docile. He is cracking the whip and also feeding them. Two-way. If you obey me, I will feed you more and more and more. The morsels of gold. If you don't obey me, I will bash you up, highly tax you, arrest you, kill you. And this is a double pressure. The lust for more money and the fear of punishment, which is making a very large number of them. I can tell you, if Mr. Modi loses the next elections, and the major states are also not BJP, it will take 2 weeks for the media to become what the world will say, very normal. Not very good, but very normal. Once the fear is removed, as we saw in 1977, when Indira Gandhi ceased to be prime minister, suddenly everybody heaved a sigh of relief.
Sir, the factor fear which you are referring to cannot be denied. but you have to also accept and also look into the work which the Hindutva organization has been doing over decades. I think for 50 or 60 years. We should not forget that Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee was once the editor of Panchajanya, the mouthpiece of the RSS. And you look at the work done by the secular parties, the Congress or the Samajwadis, you will find that they are not much serious about the work of what should I say, informations. They do not have their dedicated party journal. So why is this, sir? Why is
Hmm.
this?
As an observer, if not a student of political sciences, you would accept that barring the communist parties, which emerged from the same Communist Party of India root, the rest of the political parties were born in an anti-Congress wave. They were incubated. They never did see the RSS or this extreme poisonous right wing, which is the enemy of the United India that we know, United Subcontinent India that we know. It's an enemy, and it was so from day one. They've never seen it as their major enemy. They have aligned with it at any opportune moment. All the fragments of the Janata Party have been in, barring the CPM, which was not a member of the party but was an ally there, have been good bedfellows of the BJP at one time or the other. Naveen Patnaik was, Mayawati was, Nitish is, in the Punjab was. Every regional party has risen in opposition to the Congress, not in opposition to the BJP. For the first time, the Shiv Sena, itself a despicable party, is rising in competition, a regional party in competition with the BJP. The DMK, it was not in competition with the BJP. It was in competition with the Anna DMK. And because in the Tamil areas and basically in South India, the BJP doesn't exist. So when you see that, the failure of what you call the opposition, which was an opposition to the Congress, not an opposition to the BJP. And the other part is, which is evident, say, in international relations. Modi was denied a visa to the US because the coalition against genocide, which was set up in the US in the wake of the 2002 massacre of Muslims, raised such a powerful campaign in the US that the government of the US was convinced that this chap was a criminal against humanity. It was only when he became prime minister that diplomatic niceties took precedence. And once he ceases to be the prime minister, possibly again they will do. Also, America needs India as a purchaser of armament, as a seller of technical brains, as a timid and pliable coalition partner against China in the so-called Quads. So this organic, I would think temporary in a way, connect between the US and India nurtures Mr. Modi. It becomes impossible for Indian human rights movements to play a major role in the international human rights committees, the United Nations human rights thing in Geneva or in the American human rights thing. It becomes difficult. You cannot raise a voice because the government of India will deny it, and America will not follow up those leads with any diligence, if I may use the word.
Sir, recently Mr. Dobhal is also he is in news. Security advisor, national security advisor, Mr. Dobhal has said in front of
that civil society is an enemy of the state.
Yes, in front of police officers that civil society is going to be the new enemy. And also I have seen one Guramurthy's article also. He is also very critical of social media. So are you concerned as a journalist to get such a statements from top people that civil society members and then social media, they are now posing threat to the so-called national interest of India?
Let me first dismiss the social media myth. A large chunk of the social media is pro-Modi, is RSS. The RSS and the BJP party's IT wing are the biggest interveners in the social media. They're also the biggest owners of social media. They own maybe 9/10 of what are these called? Where you hire people and they do keep on punching.
IT cell, IT cell.
The IT cell owns all these computer cells where people are hired to carry on its work. So social media is 9/10 BJP. The dissident social media is punished. Now let me come to 4 people. Dawal is only one of them. Dawal finds fault in front of the police with the social media. The CDS, Chief of Defense Staff, empowers neighbors to kill neighbors, presuming that they are terrorists. The judicial system at the training center in Bhopal, the lead lecture of the new session is given by the RSS chief, Mohan Bhagwat. What are we seeing? All the instruments of state, police, bureaucracy, civil society, and judiciary, apart from the political apparatus, are being suborned. The defense forces are being suborned. You are, when you say all these chiefs of ED, CBI, etc., you are telling policemen, if you serve the government, you can serve as long as you wish. Till you're 65, 5 years minimum, if not more, 70. The judiciary, if you rule in our favor, all the thing. The human rights apparatus, the National Human Rights Commission, had to be chaired by law, by a former Chief Justice. That rule was changed to just get Mishra, who was a mere judge of the Supreme Court. I'm saying mere, a Supreme Court is a very big thing, but he was only a judge, not the Chief Justice, and he's made chairman. The Child Welfare Committee is with a party pick and choose. They will victimize Muslims, they'll victimize Christians, and gloss over everybody else. The Minorities Commission is checking how many Muslim youth are converting their wives. It is not bothered about how many Muslim youth are being shot. The Minorities Commission is not bothered about how many pastors are being beaten up, how many churches are being burnt. It is more bothered that some people are becoming Christians. It refuses to believe that people become Christians, Muslims, Hindus, communists by choice, not by conversion, because everybody is free to go back. If there's money, you take the money and go back. So as I said, every instrument of state, the media is not reporting it. The media is not defending it. That is denouncing it. The media is not discussing it. That is the fault of the media.
Sir, the questions of representation of the deprived section is also very important as far as media is concerned. And people from a deprived community, let's say Dalit, Adivasi, Christians, Muslims, they argue that media is basically manned by upper caste people. That is why their issues are not being taken up. So do you think that under this Modi regime, there has been some democratization, because the Hindutva people argue that they are against Lutean culture, they are against Khanmark culture, and they are helping and they are promoting real people, common people. Is it true, sir? Is it true?
How many editors today, I'm talking of even including owner editors, Jagran, Amar Ujala, all those, how many of them are progressives? How many of them hire from the Dalits? How many of them give scholarships to Dalit students so that they can come to IIMC or they can go to journalism courses in various universities, which are expensive? Are there scholarships? Are there any nurturing centers to train journalists from Dalits, from Pasmanda Muslims, from Dalit Christians, from OBCs, from Adivasis? The people who come in are the people who would, by just a Maxwellian distribution, would have excelled anywhere. Nobody is being picked up, nobody is being nurtured. There's no environment of nurture in which people from the margins can dare aspire to be news editors of major channels, can be presenters. How many, it's like Kerala serials, Malayalam serials. All the women there are more fair than Punjabi women. They wear more jewelry than Gujarati women. Almost nobody looks like a Malayali woman, you know. Because I have to look at it every day for 4 hours because my wife keeps it on. But that is the point. People cannot come unless you go out. If Ambedkar and Nehru had not given 15% reservation as a follow-up of the Pune Accord between Ambedkar and Gandhi, there would not have been a single Dalit, even as a constable. It is by force that 15% Dalits are being recruited in central government jobs. But how many of them end up secretaries, home secretaries? How many of them end up as finance secretaries? How many of them end up as DGPs, not of DGP rank and pay, but directors general of police of a state, who is the first among equals? How many of them? How many of them have been chairs of the Central Board of Direct Taxes? How many of them have chaired or been member secretaries of the UPSC? Can you think of some?
Sir, the last question. Given the challenges before free media and the attack.
Why I said that was, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, was the same thing is happening. How many Christians own or have become editors-in-chief? Only those who own the magazine, whether it is Malayalam Manorama or The Week on the one hand, or it is, let's say, Business Standard, 9. If you don't own, you don't rise. How many Muslims are editors-in-chief? MJ Akbar in the Times Now was possibly the only one. Said Naqvi, the senior most Muslim journalist, was executive editor, but never editor-in-chief of the Indian Express. So this is what I'm saying. How many young journalists can say, tomorrow, day after 20 years, I'll be the editor-in-chief of the Hindustan Times?
Sir, the last question. Given the challenges which free press is facing, what are some remedies? Quick response, sir. Your quick response. What are some measures that democratic or progressive people can take, or the message which you want to give it to reader to save our democracy? So very.
Yeah, I will say something. It is not market economy. It is not liberalization, which is the main enemy of media. The US is as capitalist as they come. England is not only capitalist, it's also very racist, even more than America. But the economists, the CNN, New York Times, Chicago Times, Washington Post still maintain a certain amount of professional independence, even if they endorse political persons in the presidential race. Even then, they are able to maintain a certain level of professionalism. On the bread and butter issues, on the interests of the people, you may oppose Donald Trump or you may support Donald Trump, but you would want health care for the poorest of the poor. The large media would work for vaccinations, not oppose it. Even in America, where all sorts of conspiracy theories are there, they would oppose, they may support America in bombing Iran. But the war in Vietnam was lost when newspapers who were embedded ones and turned the tide, started showing photographs and documentaries about the terrible things that the US was doing in Vietnam. And then they had to end that. And that's what I'm saying. The media, ultimately, you can't blame Modi for the media. The media, as Advani said, for the media under the emergency, Modi has tried to push it to its knees, tried to make it crawl. But even Modi doesn't have the strength to make the media lick. If the media is licking, it is by its own free choice because it thinks it is tasting honey, and all that it is tasting is not honey, but something very different, very stinky.
Thank you, sir. Friends, we were just talking with Dr. John Dayal, who has been in media for last 5 decades.
Kindly like, share and subscribe our YouTube channel.